So welcome, and thank you for joining us for this webinar today on trauma-informed birth support for pregnant survivors of abuse. My name is Kenya Fairley. I am a practicing doula, and I also work at the National Resource Center on Domestic Violence. And Fern Gilkerson is my colleague who also has experience doing birth work as a doula, and she works at the Pennsylvania Coalition Against Domestic Violence with a focus on healthcare and domestic violence. So we're going to be presenting today on this webinar, and we're going to be focused on talking about how to effectively provide trauma-informed birth support to survivors of domestic violence, whether they have a history of experiencing domestic violence or sexual assault, or even if they are currently experiencing violence in their relationships right now. And so the quote that's here really exemplifies what we're going to be talking about today, and it reads, "It seems like he gets angrier now that I'm pregnant. Yesterday he started hitting me in the stomach, and all I could do was curl up on the floor to try and protect the baby. I feel so vulnerable and alone." And so over the next hour or so, we're going to be talking about how we can help women who are having these types of experiences to feel safe, supported, to heal from the trauma they may be experiencing, and then also how to help them become agents in their own experience of giving birth. So the guiding assumptions that we want to work from is that regardless of whether or not a woman has experienced domestic violence or sexual assault, she may still experience trauma in childbirth. And one way that I tend to think about it is that for a lot of pregnant women, it's almost as if their body becomes community property, where people feel that they can walk up and just touch their belly without asking permission, or sometimes when they are receiving care, prenatal care from their provider may do procedures on them and on their bodies without fully explaining what the procedure is, what the purpose is behind it, or even asking their consent while they're providing those procedures. And so we're going to circle back around to that a little bit later on in the presentation and really talk about what that looks like. Another assumption is that childbirth is a natural biological process that's experienced differently by every woman. And even women that have multiple births will have a different experience during pregnancy, during labor, and while they're giving birth each time. And so we're not trying to provide a blanket or cookie-cutter approach to what women may be experiencing when they're giving birth. We also want to note that women and their partners make a variety of choices based on their personal beliefs, their faith or cultural practices, their individual upbringing, their access to medical care and health care services, their financial status, and just a wide range of other factors that really influence the decisions they make for themselves and for their family. So while we're posting comments and questions in the public chat, we want to make sure that we are not mom shaming and that we're not birth shaming anyone in terms of the choices that they're making. So we want to be cognizant of not expressing sentiments or any types of judgment regarding birth choices and parenting. So that includes whether someone should focus on trying to have a natural, vaginal, unmedicated birth, or whether someone feels that it's in their best interest to use some of the medical interventions and tools that are available to them during childbirth. We don't want to get into a conversation around what's best, if it's better to breastfeed or bottle feed. We're not trying to shame anyone for making a decision between whether they're going to use formula or breast milk, and we're not trying to shame working moms versus stay-at-home moms. So we just want to be cognizant of some of the language that we may be using in the public chat. And as Casey said when we started the webinar, please use the public chat to share your comments, your reflections, and definitely your questions. We do want to make sure that we have some time for questions towards the end, so please feel free to post those in the public chat. So we're going to talk now about what domestic violence is. So domestic violence is a pattern of abusive behaviors, and those abusive behaviors may include physical violence, acts of aggression, psychological abuse, sexual abuse, and emotional attacks, including financial and economic control and coercion that adults and adolescents use against their intimate partner. And we all know that domestic violence may occur in heterosexual relationships, same-sex relationships, as well as transgender relationships. And so we're not talking just about one type of violence that someone may experience in their relationship, but we really are wanting to look at how one partner's need to control the other is characterized through a range of tactics. So one of the easiest ways that I tend to explain what domestic violence is that you're looking for 3 key factors. So you're looking for the intimate relationship, you're looking for the types of abusive tactics that are being used, and you're looking for a pattern of behavior over the course of time. So for the purposes of this webinar, we are solely focused primarily on women as victims, because we're talking about pregnant women and their birth experience. We're not talking about abuse between family members. We're not talking about parents that are abused by their children. And we're not, in this case, talking about elder abuse or teen dating abuse because the legal definitions and available remedies for each of those types of violence that someone may experience varies from state to state, and the definition of a victim and a perpetrator can vary as well. So we're really going to focus on the traditional aspects of what domestic violence looks like. We know that anyone can be a victim of domestic violence. It cuts across all socioeconomic status, across all race and ethnicities, and across all education levels and financial levels, class levels, and things of that nature. But there are some factors that may increase or decrease the risk of victimization. And you can see some of those listed here based upon a person's gender, their gender identity, their immigration status, their ability or disability, and certainly persons that are age 50 and plus may be at greater risk of harm from their intimate partner. There are some very consistent research findings that come across a lot of different studies. We definitely have some data that can be made available if you would be interested in seeing more specific data from more specific research studies, but basically we know that 1 in 4 and 1 in 5 women have been the victim of severe physical violence or rape by an intimate partner in their lifetime. And we know that 1 in 7 men have also experienced such violence. And as I said a moment ago, predominantly women are reporting their experiences of being victimized from domestic violence, dating violence, sexual assault, and stalking, and men are predominantly being reported as the perpetrators of those acts. Intimate partner violence is a great public health burden based on the short-term and long-term consequences experienced by both victims and perpetrators. That could be someone having to take time away from work in order to seek medical treatment or go through the legal system in order to get help. It could be someone that may have to leave their job and relocate to another place. And it could also be, we know that a lot of victims experience a lifetime of health concerns and conditions based on the violence that they may have experienced. So there are a lot of things that feed into domestic violence really being a public health issue and a public health epidemic. We also know that multiracial and American Indian, Alaskan Native women experience elevated levels for most of the types of intimate partner violence that have been identified. So that means African American women, Latino women, and indigenous women, as well as women who identify as Asian Pacific Islander, again, are experience levels of intimate partner violence that are elevated above most other races. So when we think about abusive tactics, a very common tool that we use in the field is the power and control wheel, which you see here in front of you. And this is a great tool to help identify what some of the tactics are that abusers use to increase the power and control they have over victims. And so oftentimes we'll say that the physical violence and even the sexual violence does not have to occur every single day in order for that victim to feel in fear. There could be one severe physical attack that takes place that can keep that person in fear that that violence will happen again for a long period of time. So you may not always hear survivors talk about the actual physical violence happening every day, but what they oftentimes will experience every day would be the intimidation, the constant threat that the violence or the sexual assault may happen again. You will hear them talk about just feeling coerced and feeling like they have to walk around on eggshells a lot because they know that the violence can happen again and it may be more severe than it was the time before. Then abusers also use other tactics that you can see identified here on the power and control wheel, such as emotionally abusing their partner, isolating their partner from helping resources, and isolating their partner from friends or loved ones who can really help them understand that what's happening in their relationship is not okay and that it's not right. Abusers will do things like they'll minimize what's happening, and they will deny that it even happened, and they oftentimes frequently blame the victim for what's happening in that relationship and trying to make it seem as if the victim is the one that's responsible for the abuse and for ending the abuse. And so that comes up very frequently. So this is a great tool that you can look at some of the different tactics that abusers use, as well as the examples of the different tactics that abusers use to keep victims trapped in an abusive relationship. And one thing that we're really going to talk a lot about today is right here, using children, including unborn children, to create the fear in the victim as well as to increase their power and control over that person. So abusive tactics are really meant to frighten, terrorize, and really manipulate, humiliate, and blame, and sometimes even kill a current or former intimate partner. And we say current or former because there's this misconception that once a victim leaves an abusive relationship that the violence may go away or that it may not happen, when oftentimes in cases where children are involved, specifically when children are involved, the ex-partner may continue to stalk, harass, or threaten their partner or their ex-partner, and they may use the children to really manipulate their ex-partner. And so we always want to make sure that we don't have the assumption that just because the relationship has ended that this survivor is no longer experiencing any form of harassment from her partner, because that still may be an ongoing issue that that woman may be experiencing. And we're going to talk a little bit more about what that will look like in a moment. So a term that we tend to use frequently in the domestic violence field, we talk about victims in contact. And so when we talk about victims in contact, we're really referring to a specific group of victims who, for a variety of different reasons, may still be in contact with an abusive partner or ex-partner. So, for example, you can see here on the slide in front of you that a victim in contact may be someone who is staying in that relationship. And we have learned from many years of doing this work and from what survivors say to us that we want to make sure that we're empowering survivors to make their own decisions. And for some survivors, the decision that they feel is best for them at the time is to stay in that relationship. And so when we're talking about victims in contact, it may be someone who is choosing to stay in contact with that abusive partner. It could be children that are in the care of an adult victim and they're then exposed to that abusive partner. It could be children who just have to interact with an abusive parent even if they're no longer together. And so that might be victims who have to do exchanges of children for visitation, who may have to see their ex-partner during child custody hearings, who may still see their ex-partner and the children at other family events and things of that nature, or who just may be currently engaged in that relationship. It's also important to note for military families that there are other considerations for victims who may be in contact, and it could be that both partners are active duty service members. It could be that one partner is deployed for the majority of the year, so that victim is staying in that relationship because they feel that situation may be manageable. It could be that the family is living abroad and they have very few support networks. And so they may not feel that it's in their best interest to try to end that relationship while they're living in a different country. It could also be, and this is a very real concern, that sometimes a victim or children may need the military benefits such as health insurance or financial benefits in order to care for the children, and so they may remain in contact with that abusive partner. And then for some, the partner may have just returned from being deployed, and now the violence is new to the relationship. And we've seen that happen sometimes with families where one partner has been deployed during the war. They may experience a traumatic brain injury. They may have PTSD from coming back, and so now that they're home and they're trying to adjust back to being in civilian life, and the violence may be new to the relationship, either as a result of the brain injury or as a result of how they're responding to their post-traumatic stress. So when we think about why victims may choose to remain in contact, we want to make note that sometimes leaving is no guarantee of a safer or better life. And so we don't want to try to force victims into making a decision around receiving help and services by trying to force them to end that relationship or to no longer have contact with that abusive partner, because we don't know for sure that by leaving or ending that relationship that all of a sudden their life is going to suddenly be better, safer, or anything like that. We know statistically that a lot of times victims are harmed and at greater risk of being killed during the process of leaving their partner. So we want to see our role as advocates, as well as anyone that comes in contact with someone who may be experiencing domestic violence and thinking of leaving. We want to make sure that we're doing really good, thorough safety planning so that as they are exiting that relationship and ending that relationship, we know that they have the services and supports in place in order to keep themselves and their children safe. So whether that may mean that there are legal remedies that they can seek out, or if we help them obtain safe, affordable housing, or whether we help them obtain or maintain their employment. We want to work with victims to do those things that when they leave, they can leave and feel that they're going to a safe home and into a better life. So we don't want to just force victims into making these types of decisions. And so you can see listed here that some victims, there are some different considerations that they have when they're making these decisions around when to leave and how to leave. So they're thinking about the risks that are being generated from their abusive partner. What's the level of violence? Does that person have access to weapons? Are they going to follow through on the threats to harm the children or kidnap the children? Are they going to force that victim into court and press them for child custody, which the victim may not be able to afford legal representation or, and other things along that line? They're also thinking about what are just some general things in life that they may have a challenging time. We know that affordable housing is scarce in this country right now, and definitely in a lot of communities, there are not a lot of options for someone to move into safe, affordable housing. So they're thinking about what's the risk of me leaving this home that I'm in right now and having to live in my car with my children? What is the risk of me losing my job and having no employment? What's going to happen if I lose health insurance and my child needs medication? So there are a lot of different factors that victims think about in the process of making a decision about how and when to leave that relationship. So again, we want to make sure that we're not forcing victims into making decisions, but we really want to support their process of thinking through how can they safely end that relationship if that's what they want to do. And then sometimes we want to keep in mind that victims may be in contact because they are forced to be in contact with that abusive partner or ex-partner. So, for example, if there's a court order for visitation, I remember very clearly the survivor that I worked with when I was in shelter who was court ordered to oversee the visitation of her four children with their abusive father. So this woman had left her husband who was abusing her, who was threatening to abuse the children. She had come into shelter, and when she was going through the process of ending that marriage, she was then ordered by the court to supervise the visitation with that man who had been abusing her for a number of years. And so oftentimes victims are put in this really precarious predicament where had she not honored the judge's order, she herself could be placed in a more detrimental situation by not following through. She could be held in contempt of court. She could be at greater danger of losing custody of her children and things of that nature. And so sometimes victims have to be in contact with an abusive ex-partner even if they really don't want to be. And so we want to just make sure we're trying to help victims look at the big picture of what's going on and be able to provide sufficient and adequate support services rather than try to force them into making a decision that they may not be ready or able to make. So these are some examples of why it's important to support victims in contact in addition to what I just explained, that requiring them leaving or no contact as a condition of help can make life worse and more dangerous for survivors. It also reinforces the power that those who abuse have because they can then say, well, no one's going to help you. I told you these people didn't care about you. I told you no one would believe you and they're not going to do anything for you. And so we don't want to reinforce those negative notions that perpetrators use against victims. We want to make sure that we are leaving the door open for victims and survivors to come back to us and to work with us when they feel that they need us and they're ready. And we also know that advocating for all members of the family, the children as well as the adult victim that may be in contact, it makes things better for them. Every time a victim comes to us to get information, they are storing up more and more knowledge about how to navigate these different systems that may be of help to them. They're also building up their trust in us as a helping resource that's going to give them the support and the help empower them to do the things that they need to do. And so our principles really help support our principles of ending family violence. We want to enhance the safety of all survivors, so that does mean the adults as well as the children. And we also want to protect each survivor's right to make decisions about their life and their relationship and what's in the best interest of their children. So we don't want to do that for them. But when we talk about working with victims in contact, we are not saying that we think that violence in a relationship is okay. We're absolutely not saying that. And we're not saying that we think that victims should remain in an abusive environment. But we want to make sure that we are helping survivors and meeting them where they're at in order to help them get to safety and to a better life that's free of violence. We're also not saying that if we see children who are in danger that we don't have a responsibility to help that parent do something about it. So we're not saying at all that we think if victims are in imminent danger or if children are in immediate danger of being harmed that we should just kind of look away and not do anything about it. But it does mean working in partnership with victims, meeting them where they're at, and then walking with them through their journey to get to safety. We also want to keep in mind that there are many of us that live in states where we're mandated reporters of any suspected child abuse or neglect. And so we want to use some discernment in how do we make those reports and how do we help survivors access those resources. So it doesn't mean making assumptions about what's happening in that person's life, but it means talking with them, getting to know more about their story, and being those really great advocates that we know how to be in order to help give the information to survivors to make the best choices for them and for their family. So this is an example of a quote from a research study we did a few years ago that abuse survivors have shared that they become motivated to seek help when they felt that their children were at risk. And so as one survivor put it, we fight for our children before we fight for ourselves. And I think a lot of us know that to be true of a lot of parents that we come in contact with, that they really want what's best for their children, and they're going to fight in order to make sure that they can get that. So we want to be supportive of their efforts as much as possible to have a safer, better, violence-free life for their children. So we're going to talk a little bit about trauma and domestic violence as a traumatic event that survivors experience. And in this instance, when we talk about domestic violence as a traumatic event, we want to understand that it's an ongoing cyclical experience that survivors have. And so oftentimes trauma is defined as a very sudden and unexpected kind of overwhelming experience that happens to the person outside of themselves. So you think of it as something happening to that person, whether that's a car accident, a natural disaster, a physical assault. That's something that's being done to that person that oftentimes overwhelms their ability to cope with what's happening, especially when they perceive that there's a threat to their body or to their life or to their sanity. And so for a lot of folks experiencing trauma, the more you believe that you're in danger, the more traumatized you are. And so oftentimes when we're defining trauma related to domestic violence, we want to address, so what's the precipitating event? What happened? And then the second thing that we're talking about is what happened in the aftermath of experiencing that event. So you're helping the person process what happened to them, how they feel about it, and then how it has affected their life and their personhood. So as I said a moment ago, for many victims, domestic violence is an ongoing experience. And you can see here the cycle of violence that we used to teach a lot in the early days of talking about what battered women experience. And oftentimes it's going through this cycle of a honeymoon phase where things are great in the relationship and everything is going well, to moving towards a tension building and walking on eggshells and just feeling unsafe, to an explosion or an actual assault happening and taking place. And then that just continues, that cycle, just continues on, and it increases in frequency and severity over time. And so we don't teach this as much now because a lot of times survivors report that their experience is a little bit more challenging to recognize that very specific and clearly defined cycle, because for a lot of them they experience that intimidation and coercion and threats on a daily basis as they're surviving what they're experiencing. But this can be a very good way to help just kind of understand what survivors may be going through over the course of a year, over the course of several months, over the course of several weeks, into several days of what may be happening with them in their relationship. So as doulas, when you're working with a client, you want to think about how can I ask about a person's trauma history in a way that's not offensive or disrespectful. And I really got to say, sometimes, you do want to use some discernment and try to find a private time to ask your client about this, but you also just sometimes have to ask. I've been in situations where I've seen people out in public, and maybe, for example, I've seen someone at the driver's license office, and she had what appeared to be a black eye, and I just discreetly asked her if she, had any concerns about her safety or being in an abusive relationship. And I was just going to slip her quietly the number to the local domestic violence program. And then I've also seen women in grocery stores, and I've just kind of discreetly passed them a receipt that had the National Domestic Violence Hotline number written on it, and said, if you think you might need this information, I just want to share it with you. So sometimes the more that you just kind of do it, you start to feel a little bit more comfortable asking these types of questions. But when you're meeting with your client, a way that I tend to ask the question now is I just ask it as part of my normal intake and information gathering when I'm working with a client as a doula. And I may say something like, is there anything in your past that might present some challenges to a hospital stay? Such as being previously hospitalized, being hurt or assaulted by someone, or even having a bad experience with a loved one in the hospital. Are there any concerns that may come up for you? And then that just opens the door to have the conversation where they can say yes or no. I've had people say things like, well, my mother was in the hospital passing away with cancer, and so just walking into the hospital and the smell of being there can be really hard for me. I've also had clients disclose that they actually have been sexually assaulted, and then we can talk about that and figure out how to plan. But you do want to be respectful of their boundaries. You want to respect victim confidentiality, so you don't ask this information and then see it as an opportunity to go and rush to tell the nurse or go rush to tell the midwife or the OB, but you have this information, and your goal is to think about how you can support this woman as she's going to be laboring and giving birth to her baby. So if your client does disclose to you, you want to be careful to pay attention to yourself, because you don't want to create a situation where they then feel they have to take care of you because of the way you're reacting to what they say. So you want to be mindful of your body language. Don't overreact or underreact. Just, pleasantly take the information in. You don't want to be ambivalent about what you're hearing. And so you may want to say something like, well, can you tell me more about what happened to you? What was that experience like for you? Did things change for you after that? You can also say something along the lines of, do you think this would come up for you while we're at the hospital and you're in labor? Just very, very kindly, very softly, compassionately asking a little bit more information. It's not going to be helpful to say things like, well, what's wrong with you? Why didn't you just leave? Or why can't you just get over it? I don't think that has anything to do with having your baby right now. So you just want to temper what you're saying and how you're saying it. So you don't want to be offensive or judgmental. You really don't want to label what you may be hearing or seeing, because we oftentimes don't know the whole picture of what's going on with this family, and we're not really entitled to. But you do ultimately want to find out, is this a concern? And if it is, then how can we work to address this to ensure that you have a positive birth experience, which ultimately is what I think we want. So there might be some things that you'll see in the clients that you work with, and so I have some examples here about how trauma changes things for people when they're experiencing it. I've already mentioned earlier around chronic health problems. You may also see someone when they're talking about their experience, they may be extremely calm and just kind of have no real affect in their voice or their expressions, and that person may have suppressed some of their feelings related to what they've experienced. Sometimes they may have a delayed reaction to what has happened, and you may see that. You may also see someone who, and I didn't mention this before, around the chronic fatigue or low energy. So you may see someone, because of being pregnant in general, that they may have low energy and need more sleep, of course, because of all the changes their body is going through. But what you would see here from someone who is reliving a trauma is a sense of just kind of listlessness, just disinterest in life, and just not having any real energy or emotion for the excitement of their baby and things like that. You may also see someone who could be really anxious and jumpy, or someone who's just overly cheerful and submissive to their partner to the point of overcompensating to make sure everything is perfect and okay. So you want to be careful about reading too much into these things, but again, when you open the door to start to ask these conversations, then to ask these questions, that they may be more open over time as they're building trust to have these conversations and talk about these concerns if they think it may come up during labor. You may also sometimes hear that the events of the abuse kind of blur together, or the timeline is not exactly 1, 2, 3. And so you just want to be aware that, again, you're just listening and being supportive and really trying to help, validate what that person has experienced, and then, again, go back to planning for how can we make this a more positive birth experience for you. So here are a few more tips on being trauma-informed when working with survivors. So you want to remember that oftentimes experiencing trauma may cause someone to react in ways that they normally would not, solely because they're surviving the trauma experience, and they may have adapted various survival techniques in order to manage what they're experiencing on a daily basis. And you would hear a very normal range of emotions, from someone being frustrated to feeling hopeless to being in love with their partner and talking about how they really love this person. They may also at times just be very angry about what they've experienced. So this range of emotions is very real, and it's also, these are valid responses to someone who is in a relationship, and someone who's experiencing difficulties in their relationship, and someone who's also experiencing the additional life stressors of other things that are going on as they're trying to protect their babies, they're trying to protect themselves, and make some decisions about their relationship. So we want to allow survivors an opportunity to express these feelings and help them process through it, and then redirect their energy towards a more positive solution. So now we're going to talk a little bit about how all of this comes together. And so this quote is really going to set us up to start to talk more about what happens when survivors are pregnant and what the role of the doula is in providing those support services. So I'm going to pass it over to Fern, and she's going to talk about this section.
Hi, thank you, Kenya. So this quote, "Men who beat their pregnant wives understand that the pregnancy, the desired child, is often the most important thing in the world to that woman. What better way to make the woman suffer than to be able to cause her both excruciating physical pain and to lose what she values most in life." This really embodies, in another way, the whole purpose for thinking about doula work and thinking about the parallels with domestic violence work, and the bottom line. And the bottom line is really promoting health and safety for the mother and the baby in the short term and the long term. When survivors are pregnant, and are we able to advance the slide from our side? Great. When survivors are pregnant, domestic violence may begin or may worsen in that pregnancy at any point in time. There may be common conditions that pregnant women are routinely screened for that are less frequent than even domestic violence in the overall population and the population of expectant women. So they may be screened for diabetes, preeclampsia, nutrition issues, growth of the belly, and domestic violence statistically is happening at higher rates than any of those most other conditions that they're routinely being screened for. So pregnancy and abuse, when they happen together, could be associated with reproductive coercion, sexual coercion, birth control sabotage, unwanted or unintended pregnancies due to any of the aforementioned things. We do know that there is a high instance of abuse with adolescent girls who have rapid repeat pregnancies. There may be delayed prenatal care, which is a type of medical-based abuse where someone may not have access or not be allowed to have access to a healthcare provider. There also may be smoking, alcohol, drug abuse in that pregnancy as a coping mechanism, and we want to keep all the trauma-informed thought that Kenya already kind of started to review for us behind, when this stuff starts to sort of come forward. As she said before, instead of asking, why wouldn't you do that? What's wrong with you? Why wouldn't you go see a doctor? We need to be asking, what's happening? What's going on? And, let's talk about safety and really doing what we can to help you. So living in the shelter, while a domestic violence shelter, while expecting a baby, does necessitate a greater need for support than if someone were not expecting a baby. There are nutrition issues and health issues and emotional and social issues, economic and food security issues that need a particular kind of attention than if someone wasn't expecting. A survivor may need to understand, identify, and mitigate possible triggers. There may be smells or visual reminders or places that really could cause these memories to surface that could come up in pregnancy or in the birth experience. So experiencing abuse in pregnancy may result in injury to the fetus, miscarriage, preterm labor and delivery, low birth weight, hemorrhaging, placental abruption, stillbirth, maternal or fetal demise. This could be from not just physical abuse, but it could also be from mental, emotional, again we mentioned medical abuse, financial abuse, where the money isn't allowed to be provided for needed things such as food, vitamins, psychological abuse could be happening. So these could impact any of the things on that list and more. So as far as the help, what do pregnant abused women need? We definitely discussed how they have different needs. Past and current abuse could be coming up for them. The health and well-being, concerns may be intensified if they're also dealing with the traumas that Kenya discussed earlier. Next slide. Thanks. As far as the National Domestic Violence Hotline calls that have come up, the number of pregnant callers, you can see that emotional abuse, as we talked about before, is higher than the physical abuse and the sexual abuse that's being recorded on those calls. And we can see in 2011 there were 1,965 calls in, and then in 2012 that came up a bit, and then in 2013 that dropped even down to 1,905 calls from pregnant women to the hotline. As we move through, we can see that as far as types of services or assistance requested by pregnant callers, we have non-residential services. Shelter services, the need for shelter services are pretty high. Support groups come in a close second with legal advocacy, with the lowest being the emergency financial aid and emergency transportation, and then PSAs. So we can see that the need for shelter services and support groups really makes sense when thinking about this programming between and these partnerships between what we're talking about here in domestic violence advocacy and doula work. And again, going back to that bottom line of safety and support around what is really, a health issue for women and their baby. So national estimates on the prevalence of intimate partner violence indicate that approximately 8% and 5% of women report IPV before and during pregnancy. We also see that estimates of victimization by partners increased to 12% after delivery, surpassing rates of pre-pregnancy violence. So the support that pregnant women who have experienced abuse really there needs to be follow-up afterwards, after the birth, and probably for a while after the birth. We want to make sure there's a lot of need for support after in many different ways, and it could be a very vulnerable time for someone postpartum who's having this experience or has experienced it in the past and has concerns about the future.
Great. Thanks, Fern.
Sure.
I'm actually quickly responding to Danny's question in the public chat. I had to pull some numbers out of my files really quickly to give a quick answer because the question was, what percentage of these callers is it to those that are not pregnant? And so very quick answer is that last year the hotline received 174,962 contacts. So that may be by phone, email, live chat, and 2.7%, almost 3% of those contacts were from pregnant women. So that may help give you a little bit of perspective around the percentage of all victims that are reaching out to the National Domestic Violence Hotline and the number or the percentage that are reporting that they're pregnant. So here's a shameless plug. I'm going to talk now about what a doula is and the role of a doula. And so this is just a picture from a birth I had earlier this year where I just felt like this is really what birth is about. You know, you want the mom to be happy, you want a content baby, and then oftentimes the doula is tired because we've been awake all night at the birth. So we're all exhausted, but we're still really happy. And so I just wanted to share that image. So a doula is a compassionate and experienced individual who helps guide a mother and her partner through pregnancy, labor, delivery, and the postpartum period. So most doulas will provide a free initial consultation and then participate in prenatal visits to do birth planning with families to also help educate them about the process of labor, what they can expect, when to go to the hospital, comfort measures, different positions they can use for active labor, and things of that nature. We also provide continuous labor support. So we will be there from the time that we show up with the mom to help her go through labor to the time the baby comes. And then we also provide postpartum follow-up visits where we tend to help with newborn care, breastfeeding, postpartum recovery, really process the birth experience and what happened, and then we also give out referrals to other community resources. So it would be great if you can include, just as standard procedure, if you can include your local domestic violence program and your local sexual assault or rape crisis center information on the list of resources that you give out to families, so that way it doesn't seem abnormal that you're now giving this person this information. So here's some examples of how doulas very specifically support moms. In the interest of time, I'm not going to read through each of those, but a lot of it is around helping to support the laboring woman's body awareness and decision making, helping to protect the delivery environment, and really helping to advocate with the woman for the positive birth experience that she wants. And then also doulas do support dads as well. And so I want to talk a little bit about this because we're going to talk about supporting abusers that may be motivated to change. So we help dads in a lot of ways by being able for us to, as doulas, to focus on the laboring woman. Then that allows the father to be emotionally present in the experience of the birth of his child. We explain the birth process and what to expect, as labor can really go on for several long hours, and some families may be unprepared for that. We help guide the dad to be a part of the birth experience in ways that make them feel comfortable, feel active, and like they can be supportive of the laboring woman. We also help process the quickly changing and wide range of emotions that may occur, and then also stay with the mom while the father has bonding time with the baby, and then also allow him time for any needed rest or breaks and things of that nature. So there was a question that came to me on Facebook, but we're going to come back to that in a minute. Actually, no, we're going to talk through that right now. So this question came on Facebook, and the person says, Kenya, I'm messaging you because you work both with domestic violence victims and as a doula. So I knew that mom and dad were having some problems, but I didn't know the extent. So the mom had texted me and said, you know, I know this isn't pregnancy related, but I don't know who else to ask. Then she asked about shelter for domestic violence victims, and I gave her resources. The mom emailed me later saying that now her family is aware of the extent of the abuse, and they're helping her get out so she doesn't need to go into shelter. And she asked me if I still feel comfortable being her doula. And to be honest, I'm a little bit freaked out. So if you can, in the public chat, just maybe respond and type in, you know, what advice would you give to this doula who's saying this, and what advice would you say to her to give to the mom based on just the short amount of information that you know about here? So think about what advice you might give. And there are no wrong answers necessarily, so please feel free to share. Oh, that's fantastic. Danny's saying, I think this mom needs a doula more than ever now. She needs a compassionate support person to be with her through labor and birth. Agreed. So I'm going to let you know what my response was. So first of all, I said for the mom, I think she should say, for her to keep in mind, Ms. Doula, thanks for sharing this with me. Experiencing domestic violence can be a very complex issue with a lot of tough decisions for women to make, especially women with children. So luckily now her family is aware of what's going on and they're able to help her out. I would definitely suggest that a survivor stay in contact with the domestic violence program because she may need ongoing counseling. She might want to join a support group for women who've experienced abuse, even if she doesn't need shelter. And so that's very important, and that's why it's important to include the local domestic violence and sexual assault program on your list of resources, because you never know when a woman might feel like she wants to reach out to an advocate. And also, just keep in mind that sometimes couples will reconcile for the sake of the baby or the children, and they may try to make the relationship better. Or if they are separating, there can be child custody concerns that may come up, which could lead to the abuse beginning again or becoming worse than what it was before. And especially with the custody concerns, an ex parte or a domestic violence protective order is a really good first step that a lot of survivors can access, because through the ex parte, if they need an emergency order of protection, they can ask for emergency custody of the children so that the mom has custody of the children. And then the domestic violence protective order, if they go back to the hearing after the initial 10 days or so of getting the emergency order, then they may put that order in place permanently for up to a year, and then it can continue to be renewed, et cetera, as the family works out their custody concerns. But that might be a good first step, because I know one of the first instincts could be, well, just, pick up and leave with the children and take them, but that could also put victims at risk of harm, where the perpetrator may then try to file charges against them for kidnapping the children or keeping him away from the children. So definitely you would want to work with a domestic violence victim advocate as well as the legal advocate at that program in order to make sure that prior to that victim leaving with the children, that there is some custody order in place to help ensure that she can continue to have access to the children, and then also to plan around if the violence worsens while this mom is pursuing custody of her children, that she knows there's some safety in place and she knows what the resources are that she can access. So then to the doula, I said, if you don't feel safe or comfortable serving this woman, then I would definitely encourage her to find someone who is. Because, again, domestic violence can be very complex and there are a lot of legal and safety concerns at play. And then I said, however, if you want to learn more and continue to be of support to this woman, then it would be great to connect with an advocate at a local domestic violence program. Without disclosing this woman's personal information, you can still, as a doula, connect with an advocate to understand how to best help this family and how to help guide this woman towards resources that she can make choices for herself. Women's Law, one of the resources that's listed on the slide. Women's Law is a great resource for women to educate themselves about the legal system, about the laws that are in place to protect them and their children, and to get more information. And so that may be something that, even as a doula, you're not equipped to provide that woman with legal information or guidance, but you can at least direct her to that website to get started, and then connect her with a legal advocate from a domestic violence program who then can assist her with accessing other services and support along those lines. And then I also said to the doula that she would want to talk directly with the survivor to let her know that she wants to support her and learn more about how the two of them can work together to make sure that everyone is safe during prenatal visits, at the hospital or the birth location, as well as during the postpartum period. So as I said a moment ago, that sometimes there may be some abusers who are motivated to change and they simply may not know how to do that or how to go about it. But in this case, what we're concerned about are, will the abusive partner be present at the birth? That's what the concern is. So the first thing is, what does the woman want? Does she want her partner to be there? And secondly, if she does, then we want to develop a birth plan and a safety plan based on her wishes. So if she wants the partner there, then you want to talk through what may happen. And it's important that we talk about working with partners who abuse because we don't want to make victims responsible for everything. If we're saying that we won't work with them because their partner has been abusive towards them, then we're basically just leaving this woman out there on her own without any support. We also overlook a very significant opportunity to increase safety for that woman as well as for her children. And we also may overlook a potential reparative resource when there are children involved. Just like with women who've experienced trauma in birth, it could be a very healing experience and it could be transformative. And so for some people who use abuse in their relationship, it could be an opportunity for them to want to make better choices to have a healthier, safer family and to have a healthier relationship with the mother of their children and with their children as well. So if there are some who are using abuse in a relationship but they are motivated to change and they want to change, then if we can provide them with the resources and the information to access help to do that, then that is a very good response to finding out that you're working with someone where there's abuse in their relationship. So we do know a few things about Batterer intervention programs, which most counties do have a Batterer intervention or an abuser treatment program in their community. Basically, these programs are typically kind of facilitated like a support group where they meet usually weekly for about 26 to 52 weeks. They're generally facilitated in small group, closed group sessions, which means that once you join that group, you're a part of that group until it ends, so there's no flow of people coming in and out. It's usually facilitated by one or two professionally trained facilitators. Most Batterer intervention programs that I see, they try to have a male facilitator and a female facilitator with those groups. And most of them are court-ordered and they must pay fees to participate in this group. And part of them paying the fees to go through Batterer intervention is because it's a part of their accountability for using violence and abuse in their relationship, and it's part of their restitution for the harm that they've caused to victims as well. So the program typically focuses on changing learned behaviors, examining power and control dynamics, building healthy relationships, and also it involves a level of group accountability for the change that person is there to make. So we know that for those who abuse, they have a lot of concerns about losing their, that they have a difficult time oftentimes identifying their use of abusive behavior and understanding how to stop it. But they're also concerned about losing, their relationship, about losing access to their children. They may also be concerned with losing their job if they do have to go to court and they're charged, and they may have to go to jail or pay other fines and things of that nature. A lot of abusers are also concerned about damage to their reputation and what their standing might be within their community, their workplace, their place of worship, and things like that. So again, we want to try to not doulas, and not victim advocates, but for those that do work with batterers, a lot of what they're trying to understand is what can they use to help motivate that person to change their behavior, to stop using violence in their relationship. And so we do know that a lot of batterer intervention programs have some modest but positive impact on ending violence. We know that over time, these interventions do help the majority of men end their violence and their use of physical violence in relationships. But what we don't know is exactly which components of the Batterer intervention program leads to that change. But we do know that aside from anything else, barring no other intervention being available, that it is important to that perpetrators who use abuse in their relationship do go through a Batterer intervention program. So we're going to read this quote really quickly, and we are going to have to go over time mainly because of the tech issues that came up in the beginning of the session, so hopefully you all can hang in there, but we'll just continue to go through the slides. We have a few more to get through, and then we'll try to wrap up.
Okay. The labor was progressing so fast that I felt out of control and scared, and my baby hurt a lot. My body began pushing. The pain became so intense that I found myself retreating out of my body. My mind was full of images of the rape I endured when I was 2 years old, when my mother's older relative tore me open from the top of my clitoris down to my urethra.
Okay, so we'll talk a little bit more about birth-related traumas here. And, you know, this list describes factors that contribute to the feelings, some of the feelings that we just heard represented in the quote. That loss of control, loss of dignity, there could be a hostile or difficult attitude from the people around the laboring woman. There could be feelings of not being heard or an absence of informed consent to medical procedures. It's really important when supporting someone through birth and you're using the trauma-informed model that you sort of work up to how you're going to help them, work with them to maintain their autonomy and make informed choices. And part of that means the conversations that happen through meetings leading up to the actual birth. There could be a lengthy labor. There could be a very short and painful labor. You know, this may not be what anyone expects, and many times birth is nothing like is expected. And if there is an abusive partner in the picture, there could be that dynamic of that person really expecting to have some control of the situation. And so that could be an added layer to the dynamic that could be going on in birth. And so that's something that could be sort of planned for, you know, talked about in advance if there's private time between the doula and the laboring woman. Doulas can always make sure to validate, you know, ideas that she has or concerns or needs. That's another way to sort of support that trauma-informed birth experience. As far as poor pain relief or induction and high levels of medical intervention, again, this may or may not be something that's planned for, but you know, it could be part of you know, a reaction that someone's having to an unexpected birth experience. And again, those conversations could happen in advance of the birth, as well as what would happen for emergency deliveries, or you know, if there's lack of information around procedures, that doula, if she has a good rapport with the laboring woman, they could have the kind of relationship where the doula could read, you know, body signals from the laboring woman to know that perhaps she's uncomfortable with something or doesn't understand something. There could be a lack of privacy or dignity felt by the laboring woman, and again, that could be something that they agree, the doula and the laboring woman agree to in advance, that the doula would communicate with healthcare providers on site, that if she sees this happening. And there could be fears around stillbirth or the baby's safety. And this may come somewhat from abuse that we discussed earlier, or from an abuser, you know, maybe saying scary things to a pregnant woman that makes her feel unsafe when it comes time for birth. So the doula's role could be to really think about these things in advance and try to, you know, if she's aware that there's abuse going on, really begin to talk about, you know, let's do a little planning around this, and it could offset some of what could happen. As far as trauma symptoms before the birth, you know, there could be avoidance of discussing certain subjects, or really, you know, expressing that she doesn't feel anything about the upcoming birth, you know, just a sense of detachment. She could discuss sleep issues with insomnia, or just continually sleeping without really getting up and eating and moving around in a way that would be healthy when you're expecting a baby, if there's no medical issue making it so that you can't get out of bed, of course. If there's disordered eating, there could be what appears as lack of motivation, but it's really important that we don't really project our own assumptions whenever these sort of things come up for women, that we don't project that someone is just lazy or doesn't care what they eat, what have you, but that there's a connection made between what these symptoms may be and what, you know, what is being seen or observed by the doula. There could be profound sadness, you know, as that being expressed as depression or dissociation and disconnection. So it's important to pay attention to what could be going on if these are coming up. You know, as far as doulas really responding to these things coming up, it's really important to have a network of stakeholders who are invested in the health of pregnant women and are informed in domestic violence. So that's a little bit of front-loading work that doulas can do. As far as, there could be people who also specify in working with pregnant adolescents specifically. So it's great to have a range of providers to draw upon for that community network of practice for pregnant women who are experiencing abuse. So, Kenya?
Yeah, and so these are some of the trauma echoes that will come up. Some people may call them triggers, but these are some of the echoes that women may experience in birth. As Fern just really did a great job going through some of the symptoms and things you may see in birth-related trauma, where women may just feel really out of control of their body, and they may feel that things are happening really quickly or very slowly, and they just have no control over how to change that, and they just really have to submit and just kind of give over to the birth process and go with what's happening. There may be some really intense sensations as they're feeling the baby move through the birth canal, and that may cause distress where they feel their body opening in ways that can trigger past memories of abuse happening, or just feel extremely painful and intense, and they may be having a hard time managing that. Some of the positions that women are asked to get in during labor just makes them extremely vulnerable. Lying on their back, having their legs spread open, having to lay there as they're having a cervical exam or vaginal exam, and just really feeling very vulnerable to everyone that's there in the room, seeing them in that position or having their body parts exposed in ways that make them feel really unsafe and uncomfortable can lead to trauma echoes. A lot of women, when they're laboring, their belly, they may not be able to see over their belly, so they can see someone touching them and doing things to them, but they may not see exactly what's happening, and that can also lead to a trauma echo. There can be a lot of discomfort that women feel when they are attached to a lot of the different monitors, the IV, the blood pressure cuff, and this can be in general, where women start to feel really restrained and tied down by a lot of the different tools that are used in order to monitor them and the baby. And so that could add that additional layer of feeling trapped and feeling that they can't get away or that they can't move their body freely, which can lead to some trauma echoes. A lot of us talk about women laboring with the lights down low or in closed spaces, and that might be a trigger for someone who has a history of being abused in small spaces or in the dark, where maybe someone was coming in at night and waking them up and sexually assaulting them in the dark. And here they are, their body is exposed, they're in a vulnerable position, and then they're in a space that's small, and they are feeling that those memories are coming back to them. And so we want to make sure that we're planning with women around what would make them feel most comfortable and safe. If they want all of the lights on, then all of the lights need to be on. If they don't feel safe laboring in the shower because maybe abuse happened there, or maybe that was a place where they went to immediately after the abuse happened and they can't be in there, then we don't want to suggest or encourage them to labor in the shower. Or if they go into the bathroom and they feel some concern about being alone in the dark in the bathroom, then we want to do things like have other lights that can help light that space. I know I use white Christmas lights a lot in the bathrooms, and that can create a more serene environment for women to labor in, or even those LED candles that you can just get at Target or Walmart. You can easily get those, and those can help illuminate the space so a woman doesn't feel that she's, alone and in the dark. And then also for women who are breastfeeding, sometimes the frequent exposure that women experience of their breast as they're planning to breastfeed and learning to breastfeed can increase their feelings of being very vulnerable and powerless, where now they're just having to feed on demand and nurse their baby, and that could really create, again, a sense of just not being in control of what's happening with their body. And then also I know a lot of folks who are really, with the best of intentions trying to help women breastfeed may sometimes just touch a woman's breast and not even warn her or ask permission. And so, again, if you have this history of being assaulted and then someone is just touching your body in ways that make you feel really scared, then that could, again, cause a trauma echo that we want to be aware of. So like Fern said, what can you do to help? So the first thing is that you do not need to know a woman's experience with abuse to provide support. Like Fern said, you can, in the process of building that trusting relationship with her, you can look for body clues and signals that she may be uncomfortable or having a hard time or just losing her focus and rhythm during the labor process. So in advance, you want to help the mom be an agent in her own birth. You want to provide education, empowerment, and planning. You want to help her practice and also be realistic about what she can expect when she goes into the birth location. I know a lot of us are very aware of some of the hospitals in our area that may use a lot of medical interventions versus other birth locations that may be more hands-off. So we want to talk with women about what the experience may be for them and then be able to plan around that. We want to listen to and validate her concerns and needs. And so not just say, oh, well, this won't affect you in birth. It'll be fine. So we don't want to be dismissive. We really want to listen and really work with her to plan for ways that we can ensure that she feels mentally safe, emotionally safe, and physically safe while she's going through labor and the process of giving birth. If she wants any changes made to the environment, we want to respect that request and work to make that change. Like I said, whether that means all the lights are on, the doors are always open, there could be music that she would like to have playing in the background, anything that you can do to help this process and experience be more positive for the woman, you want to do that. And you really want to help her become centered within her own body. I know that a lot of time repeating helpful, empowering mantras can be a great thing. You know, having the woman repeat things, you know, she's breathing, so deep breath in, I am safe, my baby is safe. She could say things like, this hurts, but it is not hurting me. She could say, one breath, one contraction at a time. I am safe, I am not in danger. She can breathing in peace and exhaling joy. You know, so you want to work with women on what are some mantras or affirmations they can recite as they're breathing and help them stay focused on their breathing in order to relax and let go and be able to help manage some of the discomfort and pressure they may be feeling as they're laboring. And even that, a lot of women may find hypnobirthing or hypnobabies to be a really helpful type of childbirth education for them to go through and to learn some of the rituals and practices that they use, as well as some of the language that can be much more empowering to women to hear. I know I oftentimes talk with women about the fact that they will feel many different types of sensations as they're laboring and giving birth, and that they're all very different. Some are positive, some may feel uncomfortable, but they don't all have to be painful. Labor does not have to be a painful process. And so helping them reframe a little bit more of what it is that they may be saying. If possible, you can work with their care provider to see if some of the monitors can be removed. Sometimes they don't have to keep the blood pressure cuff attached to the woman's arms. You can take that off. Maybe they can use a Doppler to monitor the baby's heart rate instead of having the fetal monitors around the woman's belly. So you can try to ask for these different things. You can also suggest different positions, change comfort measures, and use the positive affirmations. And I do see a question about, do you have your go-to mantras listed somewhere? I can certainly follow up with you about that, Ashley. If you want to put your email in the public chat, I can do that. Or send it as a private chat. I can send you an email. You can also, if the laboring woman suggests, and I think Fern said this earlier, if she wants to have a conversation with her medical team and support staff at the birth location, then maybe you can work with her on how to have that conversation about her trauma history and ways they may be able to make the birth experience more supportive of what her needs would be. And then also, if for any reason the partner cannot be there at the birth, or whether they won't be there at the birth, then you can suggest that someone else be there to support her in addition to you. And so, you know, I've worked with at least one client where her partner just was not very supportive of the pregnancy and flat out refused to come to the birth. And so then, you know, thinking about, do you have a sister or a loved one or a friend or someone else that may be able to help support her through that process? And if not, then just go into it understanding that as the doula, you're going to be that primary support person for her. And this is another great quote that I would like to just read very briefly, even though we're getting short on time. But Casey, if you don't mind reading this, I think it really helps to illustrate what the experience can be like for women who have a history of trauma.
Yes. A meditation practice also helped me to heal. I can't overstress the value of a quiet and calm mind. When my water broke and the contractions began, the pain in my womb felt to me like the pain of forced penetration. It felt like rape. I panicked. I was conscious enough to tell the midwife I was having rape flashbacks, but she was young and inexperienced and could not really offer any help. I pushed my son out myself, and while I was mostly numb, I felt his body arrive in this world in exquisite detail. I could feel the shape of his sweet face and the details of his arms and legs as he emerged from my body. While the delivery was a relief, the experience was painful and somehow made me feel like a part of me was still owned by those rapes. Those two men had reached through a decade and through my boy to assert themselves during one of the most holy and sacred and private events of my life. I wanted them out.
Thank you. So I think this just really illustrates that no matter how far away a woman may be from a previous traumatic experience, and in this case rape and sexual assault, that the experience of what happens to a woman's body may easily trigger these unexpected memories to come back while she's laboring and while she's giving birth. And I think what's so powerful about this quote and about this part of Catherine's story is that she recognized what was happening, but she didn't initially have the help that she needed, but she was able to find a way to focus on the positive of her child being born and be able to see that she has some work that she still wants to do to make sure that this experience of being raped does not come back to haunt her. And so I think it was wonderful for her to see that and to acknowledge that and to realize that she wants this out of her memory and out of her body. So Fern's going to talk a little bit more about different things that advocates can do and then what the doula and advocate partnership can look like.
Sure. Hey, and I want to take a moment to thank Casey for reading that really powerful quote because, I think that kind of experience is more common than we'd like to think it is. And, I think this work is really important because the more that we start talking about it and really consciously thinking about the women that we could be working with that could be having those experiences and not articulating it and not being able to advocate for themselves, it's really profound. I think it's really profound to bring this to the surface and to really begin planning thoughtfully around what we can do to really support women in labor to have that best start with their new selves and their new baby. So what can advocates do? We'll start with the quote. In one case, the woman was 5 months pregnant without having seen any medical provider. When finally she came to the shelter, she had her first prenatal care visit in the emergency room. Again, think back to what we talked about earlier with all of the control issues that a pregnant woman who has experienced an abuse may have. She may not have access to any healthcare providers, and the emergency room visit could have been, it doesn't say why she went to the emergency room, but it could have been for a completely different reason than having had to have been abused. And, it's really important that, we're addressing this within the greater healthcare realm also, and so that we're all partners in understanding the implications between abuse and pregnancy. As far as what advocates can do, we talked a little bit about conducting safety planning, exploring those child custody matters. It may be difficult for an expectant woman to really be able to think about child custody while she's trying to think about her birth and what to expect afterwards. But, it might be worth it to start planting the seeds about, connecting her with a legal domestic violence advocate and supporting and walking through processes with her. Part of that trauma-informed care that doulas can give and advocates can give is walking through processes rather than just handing someone a sort of a to-do list or a checklist. It's really that actions and living through being able to walk through it with them. So assisting survivors in accessing prenatal and postpartum care, perhaps advocates can attend appointments, get permission from a healthcare provider and the expectant woman to attend appointments. It may be a little complicated if an abusive partner is in the picture, but again, it's talking, it's having those personal conversations in private if possible, but also not making assumptions about what she's able to do and what she wants to do. So it's really important conversations. The process of experiencing vaginal exams and cervical checks. Can you talk to a bit about really what it means for providers to be able to, to that pregnant woman, for providers to be able to explain exactly what they're doing rather than just doing processes to the expectant woman. And advocates can talk to the expectant woman about how to talk to the provider and sort of, again, walking through what words to use or how to articulate what the needs are and how to bring it up at the appointments, what she wants and doesn't want. So helping moms to obtain needed baby care supplies, connecting to community resources, having resources within domestic violence programs if those partnerships are in place between doulas and domestic violence programs. Sharing and promoting positive birth stories. We hear a whole lot about, how horrible birth is, about how you can't give birth, without a whole lot of pain or without, horrible things happening. And we want to try to, really not have those be prominent in an expectant woman's life when she's experiencing or has experienced abuse. So it's more positivity, more positive mental pictures in the head. Those are really important. Supporting moms in parenting their children. This whole parent engagement piece is a really important piece, not just, in childbirth education classes, but postpartum, and if there are other children in the picture, and really talking about what that big picture of parenting looks like. And for health professionals to screen and refer, so advocates can connect with healthcare professionals on how do you screen, referring to, as Kenya mentioned earlier, domestic violence and family planning agencies in the communities, and being able to make those referrals with personal connections, and this is what we call a warm or supportive referral in domestic violence, is really important, so that there's no hesitation and that there is a trust between healthcare providers and advocates that I trust Dr. Casey and I know she's going to take good care of you, I'd like to refer you, that kind of really trusting referral.
All right, thanks, Fern. Because we do have to wrap up, the slides are going to be provided to you, and Casey is providing the link here in the public chat, and then you will receive a follow-up email after this webinar that will include a link to the materials and an evaluation. But I want to jump really quickly in the next, we're going to wrap up in 5 minutes, and so I just want to talk for a quick moment about what the healing options may be for these survivors. So these next slides, you'll see there's information, more specific action steps that you can take to create the doula and advocate partnership. So there are a couple of slides on that, which you will see, and you'll be able to go back and read those. Here's a very specific example around safety planning and what to do at the birth location with a survivor, and how advocates and the doula and the survivor can all work together in order to enhance the safety of laboring women at the birth location. And then we were going to talk through a few examples of how doulas talk about this issue and how it may come up, but you all can go back and read those when you see them on the PowerPoint slide. And of course, we're going to talk a little bit about doula self-care, but a lot of that I think you can also go back and read, and Fern has talked a little bit about having a network of support and doing things to take care of yourself. So in terms of healing from previous trauma, so Battered Women Support Group might be a great opportunity for some women in order to access. They're provided free of charge in the local domestic violence program. Some women may also want to access other therapeutic professional care through their insurance if they have that. But then I just want to highlight that couples counseling is contraindicated. So couples counseling, marriage counseling is not a good option for for survivors to go through at all, because it makes an assumption about an equality in the relationship that does not exist. So we really counsel against women going into couples counseling. Other options for healing, women can look at body work, so Reiki, prenatal yoga could be healing and restorative for women. It allows them an opportunity to get in touch with their body, to have a deeper connection within their body, work on their focused breathing, as well as oftentimes practice some of those positive affirmations. Meditation, as I think the previous quote shared, could be really helpful. For some women, massage, vaginal steaming, as well as placenta prints and encapsulation could be really helpful for women, especially in terms of helping to be proactive about preventing any type of baby blues or postpartum depression. A mother's blessing or blessings away ceremony can be really helpful and inspiring for women. It's a great opportunity for women to come together to really support and promote the healing of the expectant mother through pregnancy, birth, and into motherhood. So oftentimes there are things like smudging to help release any of the negative energy or spirits in the space. There's an activity where everyone that's been invited can positively refocus their energy to focus on the mom and the unborn child. They can do a lot with loving affirmations, poems, prayers, share about the birth experience and things to look forward to. And oftentimes there's some creative activities, music and food as well. And a lot of families are doing these now instead of doing a baby shower. Art therapy can be amazing. This is a wonderful coloring book of birth affirmations, which you can find on Etsy, and I've included the shop there. Women can also do things like journaling, poetry, spoken word, birth affirmations, singing, or playing music. And this is a great affirmation, too, that fear closes you down, but trust opens you up. So working with women to identify some of those things that they can do. And then this is another great quote as well that really illustrates the power of meditation and resolve and healing. So Casey, if you don't mind reading that really quickly, and then we will close out the session.
Sure. Actually not. Here we are. A lot of it was to resolve and let go of the C-section, the rape, and the molestation. But I also learned patience and forgiveness. I became my own best advocate. I became my children's best defender and fan. I became a mother. I created a guardian angel out of those hypnosis sessions. She's still with me today, a big, strong Amazon woman who can't beat the crap out of anyone and doesn't take shit. She's kind of like Xena from the TV show, which I love. When I feel small or frightened or overwhelmed, she pops up carrying her sword and stomping around the room. I get strength from her. We're good friends.
Great, thank you. So I wanted to share that quote because, again, I think it really speaks to the healing power that can happen as women have the support they need in order to prepare for a very positive birth experience, to be well informed about labor and what to expect, as well as how to find and be empowered within themselves in order to know that they have the strength they need to birth their babies and to transition into motherhood in a really positive and powerful way. And so we do have some additional resources that are available to you that you can download from the slides, which talk in detail a little bit more about a lot of what we've talked about today. So there are some brochures that are available that you can access from the National Resource Center on Domestic Violence. We have some papers that you can read through that talk about violence during pregnancy and the postpartum period, as well as other ways to support pregnant survivors of abuse. We have some handouts that you can access, which I think a lot of us in the birth world know about Penny Simkin and her amazing work on this issue around supporting women who have a history of childhood sexual abuse. There are a couple of books that are listed there for you to read. I love the book Survivor Moms and would definitely strongly encourage you to read that. Also from Penny Simkin, here's the book When Survivors Give Birth, and a link to her short video talking about this issue and why it's so important for us to ask about it. There's some information available on survivor perspectives, and then other resources that you can access, both doulas as well as the clients and the women that we work with, to learn to heal from their experiences. and then places to find advocacy for domestic violence and sexual assault programs, as well as where to find doulas in your community. So Fern, do you have any final comments that you'd like to make before we close the session?
Oh my goodness. Well, I just want to wish everyone well who really delved into, thoughtfully and conscientiously sort of working with domestic violence programs and really starting to plant those seeds. It's a really powerful partnership to create. And, as Kenya said, there is a slide on the PowerPoints about doula and advocate partnerships, and I ask that if you do delve into that area of partnering your community, that you take a look at the list and, consider policy and protocol and attending conferences together, and also cross-training each other and peer mentoring and doing whatever you can to really build a strong partnership with not only yourself, but with perhaps a task force or a circle of doulas in connection with that program.
Perfect. Thanks so much, Fern. So we're going to go ahead and close out right now. Thank you all for joining us, and thank you for hanging in there. We did go well over time, but I appreciate you all staying to the end. Thank you so much for this and for all of the discussion in the public chat. And so we will make a recording of the session available, but we certainly do encourage you to go back and read through the slides, as well as the technical assistance guidance that's included with a link on how to form these partnerships between domestic violence programs and doulas in the community. And then reach out to us with additional questions or thoughts and things of that nature. So thank you all very much for joining us, and have a great afternoon.